Hello, everybody. Ed Rosenberg again, and tonight I got a very special guest. I got Kelly Johnston. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm doing it. How are you? Good?
Okay, now Kelly is no stranger. She was with us at Abigail's. She gave a fantastic talk. Thank you very much for joining that time. Kelly, first of all, for those who don't know you or not so familiar with you, tell us a little bit about what your background was at Amazon, please.
Sure. I was with the company for about 9.5 years, and I spent almost all that time in seller performance. And my last role was actually managing that team out of the Seattle office. So I have a pretty broad experience with all the things that you encounter as sellers on Amazon today.
All right. Okay, now seller performance, it seemed like in the past few months or last year they've been a lot more aggressive. Would you agree?
I would say that Amazon as a whole has been a lot more aggressive, but particularly in that arena, yes.
Right. Okay, so we're going to ask you, what our group does is we just try to comply. We don't, we just try our best to comply. And there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times there's communication gaps, so we're trying to close that gap. So I'll get right into it. Somebody received a lawyer letter,
Mm-hmm.
and this happens all the time. Sometimes it's a lawyer letter by mail, or it's a lawyer letter through Amazon Messenger, saying they're not authorized to sell cease and desist. What do they
Mm-hmm.
do?
That's a tough one because if you are being contacted by an attorney, obviously there's actual weight behind that. The person contacting you has spent some time and energy. However, quite often sellers are contacted, particularly through the buyer messenger system, by people who are noted as brand ambassadors or brand managers. And they say almost word for word what you just said, which is you're not authorized to sell. The problem with that is that's a legal fiction. If you are buying from a distributor, let's say you buy from Apple directly, or you buy from Pioneer, just to use an example, once you've bought that material from them, it's yours to do with as you please. It's called the first sale doctrine. So you have two choices once you've received this notification, particularly the one via email. You don't know who's on the other end of that notification. They may identify themselves as attorney, they may not. If they're telling you that you are not authorized, they're not making a specific infringement claim against you, you can choose to respond and ask for more information, ask why you're not authorized. You can choose to ignore it. What I don't recommend is flaming that person back who has contacted you because that can start problems that you don't necessarily want. Amazon wants sellers and buyers and other parties to correspond cordially on the site. And so they don't really like it when you get angry and say things that you probably don't really mean anyway to someone who's probably just trying to do their job. So I guess the message is take it with a grain of salt and make a determination based on the risk tolerance that you have. If you think that this person could potentially harm you, your best bet may be to ask for some more information and try to determine if they're actually going to say anything about infringement. But if they don't say trademark or copyright, they really have no right to demand that you take the product down.
Mhm. So you don't think it's like I think what I would do and what I would suggest is because the last thing I want, I would rather have get a lawyer's letter than a notification from Amazon.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the problem is that many sellers, or brand owners, I should say, because it's not always another seller, but a brand owner sometimes goes a little overboard and will contact people via attorneys, most definitely in a way to try to intimidate a seller who may not be doing anything wrong. That's why I guess the first thing you should do when you get some kind of notice like that is breathe and calm and be patient and reread it again and try to determine exactly what's happening. If they are telling you you're just not authorized, that is not the same as infringing. Now, if that person contacts you and says, hi, I'm the representative for whatever brand, and you are infringing against our copyright or our trademark, then I would be a little more open to having that dialogue with them and asking them why, what am I violating? What can I do to resolve this? Rather than ignoring or flaming them back. But if it's strictly you're not authorized to list this, that's very vague and is frankly is a tactic used by people to try to eliminate competition, and that's why you have to be suspect. Protect yourself, but also don't give up the turf that you very rightly won on that listing or that ASIN if you were selling a legitimate product.
Right, but what if they go to Amazon and they say that I'm listing it as new, and because I'm not authorized, there's no warranty, so it's not described.
Amazon's not going to accurately, they can't do anything without a test buy. If that person has gone to the lengths of doing a test buy from you and there's nothing wrong with it, and they try to misrepresent that to Amazon, likely nothing will happen. If they don't do a test buy, Amazon will tell them they have to do one in order for Amazon to do anything. Because as I said, Amazon does not want to control supply chain issues, which is really what that you aren't authorized to sell is about. It's a manufacturer who's upset that distributors are selling their product to places and people that they don't want, which again, legally, there's nothing they can do to stop that. So they're very much just trying to control in any way that they can, and that's usually the first salvo, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying to you will actually culminate in an investigation with Amazon. If they actually felt that you were infringing, or the person was infringing, whether it was trademark or copyright, they would go to Amazon directly. They know how to follow that process. If they're contacting you and saying you're not authorized, it's often that they don't have any other way to try to force you off a listing.
So in a way, it's like it could be an act of desperation, or it could be they don't know. It could be they don't know the Amazon process.
Correct, absolutely, both are possible, and that's why if your gut is telling you to have a peaceful dialogue with someone on that, it may be worth reaching out and asking for a little bit more information. You're not obligated to do that by any stretch of the means, but everyone has a different risk tolerance for these kinds of things, and if I felt like there was some potential blowback that might be harmful to me as a seller, I might go ahead and exercise that option, but you do not have to. You're not required to.
Right. I think I would just delist and then talk to them. Like call a timeout.
You could do that. Absolutely, that's a great option. In fact, you take your listing offline and say, hey, what's going on? And then kind of whatever the culmination of that conversation is, you decide to relist or not. Yeah. That's never a bad idea because that's a little bit more of a safety gauge. And you can even tell them why you've done it if you want. Otherwise, just take your listing off and reach out and see what they say. Right. Great idea, Ed. I like that.
Yeah, okay, so that's good. You see, I received a lawyer letter a few months ago that an item which I'm selling for like years, I sell like motorcycle audio accessories, and one of the clamps, the way it clamps onto the handlebars, the guy says that he has a patent on it.
Oh, which that's even tougher to investigate from your side.
Yeah, and there's no way I could have known it unless I would have hired an expert lawyer. Like, why am I dreaming that there's a certain way it closed? So what I did, I just delisted the item and I took the 40-page document and I threw it in the garbage because I'm not fighting this guy.
No, and I think patents are kind of the black sheep of that IP family in a sense, in that you have a lot harder time when you are not normally dealing with patent issues, investigating a claim like that when someone makes it to you. And so if it's within your means and you feel comfortable doing so, retaining an IP attorney is never a bad idea. But in your case, that's also a perfectly viable way of going about it, because it sounds like in this particular case, it didn't strike to the heart of your business. It wasn't your main product. It was something that you were selling, but it wasn't a huge burden. Obviously, like, you have to weigh it. If it had been your main product and you were concerned that the patent wasn't valid, I'm sure you probably would have done something different. But in a situation like that, that's also fair. It's kind of like the price of admission sometimes is knowing that you may have to make concessions that way, and I think that's a great example.
Right. Okay, so that was really good. Now, one more question someone has asked me, like let's say in that case, how would I know if I know most people know when they're violating a copyright, but how would I know, if I'm going overseas and I'm developing a product, and and I'm putting in, $200,000 in this product, how do I know I'm not going to get that 40-page lawyer document
for a patent or a trademark?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think a trademark. I guess I'll know because if I'm using my own brand, it's not likely.
Yeah. If you're doing that, if you're putting the money into it, and you're being careful, like you said, copyright is kind of the easiest of the three to determine. Hey, I shouldn't use that person's image, or I shouldn't use their words. I shouldn't copy all their language. Whatever. That's kind of the easiest and lowest bar to me. Trademark can be a little bit tougher, but not generally. If you're even remotely aware of what it is that you're attempting to market in the space you're trying to market, it's usually pretty easy to avoid, apple-shaped trademarks, things like that. You're going to be like, okay, I should stay away from that. But patent is tough. There are some resources online. I know that like there's the USTPO website for trade patents. The problem is that wading through that information can be very difficult. If you are not an attorney, if you have no expertise in researching patents, it can be almost impossible to find what you want, and you may scare yourself off of pursuing something because you misinterpret that what you're looking at is actually what you think it is. That's when I think it pays to invest with an IP attorney who specializes in patents. Often they can delegate something like that to a legal assistant who can do the necessary research for you. It doesn't take very long, and you can find out for sure if, in fact, you could be infringing on a patent. It's very complicated because you get patents that overlap with other things but don't necessarily violate, and they can coexist. You have no idea. So before you sink $200,000 in, do your homework. I cannot stress that enough. It's that old saying, penny wise, pound foolish kind of thing. And that ounce of cure is better than that. I would rather you not have the disease. Spend the money on the cure. It's painful up front, but it will save you from getting too far down the line.
Right. Okay, that was really good. So thank you on that. Now, how about this? Someone asked what if I have an account that was suspended 5-6 years ago.
Sure.
Is there any chance of getting it back?
There's always a chance. Every situation is different, and what I always tell clients who come to me with this kind of concern is that there are no two accounts are going to be the same, and things change. 5 and 6 years ago, things that were a violation then that may have gotten a seller account shut down aren't now. So, for instance, a great example: international editions. From, I think all the way up through 2013, in fact, international edition textbooks were not permitted on Amazon. Even though they were legally able to be sold in the US and there were no real legal restrictions from a government standpoint, Amazon simply prohibited them. And so sellers were getting blocked left and right every textbook season for listing these items. And so now there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of selling accounts that have been sitting there just waiting for years that could be reinstated now because the items that they're selling are no longer prohibited.
Wow.
So that's one example. Another example is a situation where a client of mine that I actually worked with recently had some performance issues. He got shut down and he just let it go. He didn't appeal. He didn't try to get his account back. But now he would really like to sell, and he wondered if he could get his account back. And it's been 6 years. And again, a lot has changed. Metrics that didn't exist back then exist now. He's got a whole new business. He has a brick and mortar store. And so we went ahead and started the appeals process for him. We'll see where he ends up, but it's worth it because he's learned a lot. And I think he can demonstrate to Amazon that he's not a risk the way that he was at the time. So yes, my answer is in probably most cases, it's worth pursuing. There will be very few where that's not the case. And my job would be to tell you as a seller, don't pursue this. But as you probably have figured out from working with lots of people in different spaces, you have to use your gut. And if somebody tells you something and it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right. Now, someone what was suspended 5-6 years ago, and they go and they try opening up a second account, they'll find them, right?
The likelihood is very good that they would. And the reason I say that is that it can be a very arduous task to try to get enough different information assembled to evade their detection. Secondly, they're constantly improving said detection. We as humans like to think that we are unpredictable and that we can change our spots, but we usually are not very good at that. We're actually pretty predictable. And they use a lot of really intense machine learning and other very highly technical things to look for patterns. That's what they're looking for. So while it's absolutely possible, is it advisable? What's your risk tolerance? That's what I always ask my clients. It's not my decision to make. I kind of take a neutral position on it. I understand it. Amazon could do better about how they shut down accounts and what they do to reinstate. They wouldn't drive as many sellers to seek another account later. But I understand why sellers do it. There's a very large business model that they no longer have access to. I don't blame them for wanting to get back on.
So you think if somebody has been running duplicate accounts for 5 years, you think they still shouldn't sleep at night?
So 2 accounts that are actually operating at the same time,
Yeah.
or 1 account that's been shut down and a new account that's been reinstated.
Yeah.
Or a new account that's active, I'm sorry.
The second, let's say they open 2 new, let's say 1 account is shut down, they will open up 2 new accounts.
Well, it depends on how crafty they were at the outset. I have seen sellers get away with having a blocked account that's been shut down legitimately and correctly, and then reopen a new account and be live for 4 or 5 years before anybody ever makes a connection. And if you're paying attention when you're at Amazon, the right answer is almost always going to be allow that seller to continue to sell. They have obviously proven that whatever mistakes they made previously, they've corrected. That doesn't always happen, I'm sad to say. I don't think every investigator sees things in the big picture standpoint, because that's how I look at it. And so you cannot ever guarantee that you won't get shut down. That's the thing. It's the reality. It's the truth. Something could always come along and change that dynamic. But that said, will they connect you? It very much depends on how you set up the first account and the second account. If you have sign-ins that are in between those 2 accounts, that may not be enough to trip the alarm bells. But it pays you to make sure that you are keeping those things as separate as you can if you do have a prior account in your past.
Right. Have you seen people who are running duplicate accounts for 4 or 5 years, and after like 5 years, they'll nail you?
Yes, unfortunately I have, and there were quite a few that I reinstated after my investigator shut them down. Just like in that example, a seller who performed poorly at textbook season, wasn't fulfilling, he got shut down. He managed to get back on the platform. He hit his tracks pretty well, but eventually he slipped up, and he pretty much implicated himself, not intentionally. He wasn't trying to do it, it was just a mistake. And my investigator shut him down.
Wow.
Justified in the sense that, yes, he was related to a closed account, but again, he'd been active for 4 years, selling like a champion throughout all 365 days of the year. And really, he shouldn't have been shut down. That's a nuanced decision that sometimes comes with experience, but sometimes you just have people that think, oh, they've been on the site before? Nope. So you get that black and white mentality, which is not at all how that should work. Risk management is not black and white, but yeah, I've seen it many times. It can happen. It's always worth appealing if it happens to you.
Right, but what could possibly be your appeal if you opened up a duplicate account?
Well, as my business partner Rachel is very fond of saying, fall on your sword.
Right.
Tell the truth. Tell the truth. The best appeals I ever saw when I was overseeing the Jeff Bezos escalation process were the appeals where sellers were honest about what had happened. I can't tell you how many times I saw someone say, I did this, yes, you're absolutely correct, I made mistakes, but I've corrected them, and here's what I've done. To me, that shows that you understand the gravity of what you've done when I was doing that particular job. And that's what I advise my clients now. When someone is having an issue, you are very unlikely to get anywhere with Amazon if you are obfuscating the problem or if you're just not forthcoming with enough detail. So fall on the sword. Be truthful.
Right, and I started using that line from, so I must have gotten it from Rachel.
Probably. Osmosis, it happens.
Yeah, I didn't think I was smart enough to think of that one myself. Okay, so that's interesting. So now, let me ask you this. If I want to log in, any problem with logging into like a public Wi-Fi, like in Dunkin' Donuts or something like that? You know, a lot of people are spooked about such type of things.
Sure. No, that's a great question, actually. So from a straight security standpoint, you are always at risk for just general criminal behavior by others when you're logging into a public Wi-Fi if you're not careful. From an Amazon standpoint, you should be safe. And the reason I say that is that they can determine when a login is coming in from a public Wi-Fi. It's real obvious that the network is Starbucks or, you know, whatever. So those kinds of sign-ins are not going to harm you from a connecting the dots between accounts standpoint or from the likelihood that they may think that you're compromised. A single sign-in will do nothing. It's just, it's a data point in a sea of data points. that really has no basis for meaning because it's not connected to anything else. Now, I bet you're thinking, what happens when I go overseas? Great question. You do want to be careful there as well, also from a general security standpoint. But I really, really do not recommend going. Let's say you're living your happy days in Kansas, in the middle of the United States, and you travel to Slovenia, and you decide, this would be an excellent time for me to just update all of my information. That is going to set up all kinds of red flags. It would with your bank. It would with any financial institution that you work with, and Amazon is no different, so don't do that.
Right.
If you do need to make changes, if something comes up that's urgent, contact seller support and say, look, I need to do this. Can you help me make sure that I don't have any problems with my account? And they can reach out on behalf to seller performance and say, look, just so you know, they're doing this, the account's fine, there's no issues. You should be okay if you do that, but I don't recommend it because they will be looking at it. If you go to an area like Thailand, Vietnam, Russia, those areas all have high epicenters of fraud. So you have to be very careful. Amazon is looking at sign-ins from there. But again, it's in conjunction with other activity. So if you suddenly decide that your business model needs to do a 180-degree change while you're in Russia, you're probably going to have some issues.
Right.
So be smart.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But Dunkin' Donuts, something like that, Starbucks, nothing to worry about.
No, you should be totally fine. Again, it's a public Wi-Fi. It's very obvious that it's public Wi-Fi. Your biggest concern really is making sure that nobody's scooping in on your traffic and getting keystrokes on you in any way, shape, or form. Just be generally safe with your devices, and you should be fine.
Right. Okay. Very good. I wanted to ask you. So a lot of people have been getting, myself included. You get a skew. You get a nation shut down, high rate of negativity experience or something. They say it's 20%. They shut it down, and it seems like it's all automated. Is that seller performance? Should I be worried?
Well, it's using the same tools that seller performance uses, but that's coming from FBA. If you're referring specifically to those messages where they say they've closed your SKU, but you can reactivate it.
Yeah, exactly.
That seems to be driven by the FBA ops team, and I do believe it is in fact automated. I don't believe a single person is looking at those emails, which is frustrating because you're like, well, great, where did you get this info? My advice with those, particularly the FBA ones, think of those as kind of a soft warning in the sense that they are giving you an opportunity to look at what's going on and fix it because they're not blocking your SKU. You can relist it in a heartbeat. You can relist it without doing any homework if you wanted to. I don't recommend it. If they came to you, Ed, today and said, this headlight that you're selling for motorcycles, 20% defect rate, you could opt to relist it, but take a look at it. Is it because the stuff's damaged in the warehouse? Is it because you sent the bronze ones and you meant to send the black ones? What's going on there? There's almost always a root cause that can be traced back to either something FBA has done or something you have done or a combination of those two that may make it worth you leaving that SKU offline until you fix it. That may mean a removal order. There's a whole bunch of steps that you may need to take as a seller to ensure that you're covering your bases. Now, if you do your look and you can't figure out what's driving that issue and you feel confident that it's not something that you've done, you can reinstate the listing, but that doesn't mean that there won't be problems later. So it behooves you to do that deep dive and find that root cause.
Right.
Now, if it comes from seller performance, that's a whole other animal because they're the gatekeepers. They're the ones that have the ability to shut you down. So if seller performance says you have a condition issue, you have an authenticity issue, whatever that may be, you really want to make sure your ducks are in a row. Respond quickly, but with good information. It doesn't help you to just respond off the cuff with, whatever comes to your brain. Stop, breathe, think, gather that data, then go back to them with information because otherwise you can get caught in that endless loop of, but we need more information,
Right.
Which you don't want. You don't have time for that. Nobody does.
No. Well, do you know why sometimes seller performance will jump in and why sometimes FBA compliance, the automatic thing, will jump in?
Well, I think what's happened with that, and I've not been able to get clear answers, but I think FBA wanted to have a way to maybe proactively tell sellers that they were seeing issues without necessarily bringing the hammer down that seller performance is. Because most of the problems that my clients are seeing, there genuinely are condition issues. Maybe because the product was damaged in transit to FBA and the FBA fulfillment center folks aren't doing a good job of going, oh wow, this really shouldn't be placed on the shelf, or what have you. I mean, there's a whole lot of permutations there that aren't really, they aren't as nefarious sometimes as just straight up counterfeit issues can be, and those can be very difficult to sort for the seller and for Amazon. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure why they decided to have a duplicative approach. It seems kind of confusing. If I were a seller and I suddenly started getting emails from FBA, I would be a little concerned because the messages are very like seller performance, only a little more friendly. Right. So kind of confusing. Now, most of the time, I think it has to do with where is the complaint originating? Where is the problem originating? So seller performance draws its reporting and its investigations data from certain places and certain times and certain internal teams. FBA gets it from wherever they get it. So I think it has something to do with that. And obviously, as you all know, the buyer complaints are a huge source of investigation material for Amazon. Seller performance gets a lot of those. And so if they've gotten something directly from a buyer, it may prompt them to jump in, especially if that FBA stuff is automated, which I believe it is.
Right. I think we should be fortunate if you get one of those.
I agree. I agree. It's a chance. It's an opportunity. Always within that adversity, there's that silver lining that you may have just saved yourself a major problem because somebody or someone gave you a chance to look at what's happening with that ASIN. And think of it this way, if it's a #1 seller for you, or at least a high-selling ASIN, I would want to know. I would want to have that chance to say, I don't want this SKU permanently blocked by seller performance because I didn't get my act in gear and fix whatever the problem was.
Right. Forget about getting it blocked. I don't want to be suspended completely.
That too. Well, that too. But I mean, if you're otherwise doing well, but this is your bread and butter for your selling account, and they suddenly take that ASIN away from you, you might as well not have an account. Yes, obviously the goal is to avoid suspension or any way you can. But just from losing product, that can almost be more damaging. Amazon has finally kind of figured out, I think, that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach, meaning you lose your entire account. You can lose an ASIN or 2 ASINs without completely being shut down, and so they have kind of the best of both worlds. It's still painful for you because you're losing sales off of that, but it's better than losing your account.
Yeah, I heard for some of the shipping issues, too many cancellations. I heard that it's shutting people down from a merchant fulfilled. Have you heard about that?
Yes, actually, I was at the SCO conference last week in Philadelphia.
How was that?
Well, it was good. I got to meet a lot of people who do very interesting work, mostly on the technical side. So it was actually great for me to be able to talk to them about that stuff like that. But I did speak with a gentleman who works with a rather large company who has multiple accounts on the site. They have location accounts. It's something that it's like a franchise, think of it like that. Amazon doesn't do that anymore, so these accounts have been around for a very long time. They're very old, but they are operated individually at the store level. Well, apparently there was a very large batch of sellers, around 5,000 people, that were auto-suspended about 14 days ago. Wow. Yeah. Wow. And apparently quite a few of those were incorrect suspensions. However, the really bad part for the selling community was that they were told they had to go through the appeal process anyway, even though they should not have been suspended. My understanding is a large portion of those sellers were both for large, either late shipment rates or cancellation. So they were having both issues, but they were almost all merchant fulfilled sellers. So yeah, there definitely seems to be some emphasis happening there.
Yeah, they want. I mean, to me, it seems like between the return dissatisfaction, I know we spoke about this in person, and the customer dissatisfaction, and the valid tracking, and they just want everyone to be on FBA. It seems like.
I think that that's part of it. I also think that they're raising the bar in general for the sellers that they want on the site. One of the things that's been a long time project is the customer's voice in terms of what the buying community is experiencing with third-party sellers. Amazon traditionally, at least in my experience when I was there, did not do a very good job of actually mining that data and doing something good with it. I personally am not a fan of these two new metrics that are currently still in beta. I believe I said that to you in person. I had some concerns. I don't think that the idea is bad. I just question, is the execution going to work? And I'm not quite sure they've gotten that right. The fact that it's still in beta when it was supposed to be live and in the wild in February tells me that they know there are issues. But my advice to all of you who are seeing these metrics in your account, pay attention to them.
Right.
Watch for changes.
They've showed up in some seller performance emails as like an afterthought. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, I have seen a couple, but my feeling is that you will be seeing them more regularly soon. So it's best to get on top of them and make sure that you're doing what you need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that was very good. One last question. Those escalations. I always wanted to know, how exactly does that work? You said you met Jeff Bezos once, right?
I did, by accident, and it was a really funny little conversation I had with him. But I never forgot that after I started managing the process. So how does it work? Well, you're a seller, you get shut down, or you have some other kind of adverse experience on the website, and you write to Jeff about it. Jeff at Amazon, that's his email. It's always been his email, and it's out there for public consumption. You tell Jeff what your problem is, and he and his admins every day, they look at the emails that they get and they determine where they have to go. So sometimes people are talking about problems with search, or maybe they've got issues with the way that certain technical functions in Seller Central work. That would go to a completely different set of people, because obviously, seller performance isn't made up of programmers. That's not their thing. Or maybe they have a problem with seller support. That would go to seller support leadership. But anything concerning enforcement, whether they took your ASIN down, they canceled your listing, they took your entire account, whatever, that would go to seller performance leadership. And those then would come to me.
Wow.
Because I know, how did I get so lucky, right? And my colleague that I worked with, we would kind of take ownership of whatever came to us. So sometimes we'd have a bunch in 1 week, sometimes we wouldn't have any. But our job then was to do a complete and thorough review from the beginning to see what happened with that particular account, and then make a recommendation on the next action. Quite often, two things would come out of those investigations. The seller would get their account back, or they would get their ASIN back, whatever. And we would make changes to our processes and our tools based on that feedback. Because one thing that is really easy to lose sight of when you work at a company that large is what you do, how it affects people way out far. You can't see it from their perspective. And when somebody tells you, hey, what you're doing is broken and here's why, that's extremely valuable information to have. And so part of my job would be, once we've done the review and we make our recommendation, is we had to provide our own little plan of action to Jeff about how that wasn't going to happen again. So I know all about submitting plans of action, because I kind of had to do it as part of my job. Because he was not interested in, what do we do to fix this seller if there's a systemic issue? He wanted to know how we were going to fix all the issues. So while he cared about what Joe Smith was writing in about, if Joe Smith was being victimized by a bad process or a bad blurb or whatever we were sending out that was causing the issue, he wanted us to fix it so that it never happened again.
You must have seen like gut-wrenching emails, because
I saw a lot of stuff that was really hard. Sellers who, I truly believe were telling me the absolute truth about what was going on. And I saw some really horrendous things too, where people were just angry and they said anything that came to their mind. And it was really hard to determine, where do you go with that? Because I don't want to have people on the site that are going to abuse other people, whether they're buyers or sellers. But I also wanted to make sure that we were doing the right thing, not just from the seller side, but the buyer side and Amazon side. Everybody has to kind of have a say in that decision. And when you're reviewing things, if you're a good investigator or a good manager, you're taking all of that into consideration. So yeah, I saw a lot. It could be a very difficult part of my job, and it was also very time consuming, but it was very worth it at the same time.
Right. I mean, you're controlling like the guy, a person's livelihood.
Yeah, and that's what I always taught my investigators. It was important to me that they understood that what they were looking at was not just data points on a screen. This was someone's life. Maybe they had put everything they had into that business. You need to make the best decision you can. to make sure that you are not adversely impacting the seller so much, but that you are also mitigating whatever the risk is. Fraud is a different animal. When you have somebody who's signed up with, fraudulent credentials, that person obviously is not there for good reasons.
Right.
You have somebody who is selling legitimate product and they're doing things mostly right, but they have a problem. If it's not something that's just insurmountably dangerous, that person deserves to have an opportunity to defend themselves and stay on the platform. Period. And people deserve second chances. That's always how it's been, although I see less and less of that as time marches on, and that's a concern for me and for you and my clients.
Right. In other words, once you get suspended, the chance of getting back on, or if you're suspended twice, let's say within 6 months, you're gone, right?
It can be really hard. Every situation is different, but my concern is I don't see consistent second chances being granted to sellers who I think deserve them. And I say that as someone who used to do this job. I started as an investigator and I moved my way up to manager, and so I've seen every aspect of that position and what you are asked to do. It's not easy, but that said, there's no platform without sellers. Why would you alienate every single person in your customer base if you can come to a more equitable decision? And I think that's where people get hung up. They're scared to make those choices.
Right.
But you gotta be fearless to do that job.
Right. Now, the sellers are going to keep coming back to Amazon because that's where the buyers are.
Yes, absolutely. It's no different than when eBay was king back in the day. You would do anything to get back on that platform, no matter what. And they had very similar issues, from what I understand. One of my mentors at Amazon actually worked in eBay's risk management team, and she said it was very similar, although they had far more people at the outset than we did. We were a little bit smaller. But she said the problems were the same. People wanted back on, and they would do anything to get back on the platform that they could.
Right. It's hard to be a serious online seller unless you have, your Toys R Us, you have a name brand, name site yourself, without, 30, 40, 50% Amazon at least. So
Yes, and it is a different landscape than it was.
Yeah.
12 years ago, you could get started with next to nothing and really build a solid business. Now you have to have a bit more planning ahead of schedule. You have to know what it is that you're going to pursue. What kind of business are you going to build? You don't necessarily have to be an accountant or have any kind of specific business degree, but you really have to understand how Amazon is set up. It is way more complicated than it used to be 10 and 12 years ago. So.
Right, and that's why I feel like this group which we have to deal with all these issues, I think is helpful to a lot of people.
No, absolutely. You have a great group. You're all there to help each other, and that's what matters. I think sharing that knowledge is probably the best thing you guys can do. It's a great setup for you.
Right. Okay, Kelly, this was a fantastic interview, and I really appreciate you taking the time. Once again, thank you for coming out that time to New York, and we hope to see you again pretty soon. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope everybody found that useful, and I'd be happy to do it again.
Okay, likewise. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.